Welcome back to the deep dive. I hope you are sitting down for this one, or at least in a headspace where you are ready to have the curtain pulled back on how the world actually works.
Mm.
Because today, we are tackling a subject that is essentially omnipresent. It is everywhere you look, and yet, for the vast majority of us, it is completely invisible.
That is such a good way to put it. We're talking about a ghost in the machine of the global economy, a specter that haunts boardrooms and government offices alike.
Exactly. We are talking about a single firm, a firm that advises the White House, the Vatican, the CIA, the FBI, the Department of Defense, and, well, pretty much every major Fortune 500 company you can list off the top of your head.
It's an incredible list.
They have been called the Catholic Church of Management Consulting. We're, of course, talking about McKinsey and Company.
The firm that whispers in the ear of power. It's not an exaggeration.
Not at all. And the source material we are working with today is absolutely explosive. It is the book When McKinsey Comes to Town by Walt Bogdanich and Michael Forsyth. And I want to set the expectation right now for you. This is not a dry business school textbook.
No,
This isn't about how to optimize a supply chain for widgets.
not at all. This is a deep, forensic, investigative look into how a single firm, operating largely in the shadows, has shaped, well, everything. Everything from the cost of your medical care to the safety of the theme parks you take your kids to.
And even, the survival of authoritarian regimes halfway across the world.
It's a staggering scope of influence.
It is honestly wild. And I think the best place to start is with this central contradiction that the authors highlight right at the beginning. Because if you walk onto a college campus today, Harvard, Yale, Oxford, McKinsey is treated like royalty.
Oh, they are the top prize?
They recruit the absolute smartest people from the Ivy League's Rhodes Scholars, the top of the class at Wharton. And the pitch is incredibly seductive.
It is. The pitch is, come here, join us, and you will solve the world's hardest problems. That's the promise.
Right.
You will save the planet. You will reduce global poverty. You will fix broken healthcare systems. They receive something like, 200,000 applicants a year?
200,000. And the acceptance rate is razor thin between 1% and 2%.
So statistically, it is harder to get a job at McKinsey than it is to get into Harvard in the first place.
Which is just insane when you think about it.
Exactly. And the people joining, for the most part, are idealists. They are brilliant, yes, but they also want to make a difference. They really believe in the mission.
Right. They want to change the world. But then, and this is the pivot point of the entire book,
Yeah.
you open the client list. And who do you find? It's not just charities and NGOs.
Not even close. It is the world's biggest polluters. It is manufacturers of addictive products. It is authoritarian governments that are actively suppressing human rights.
It feels like there is this massive, almost schizophrenic disconnect between the recruiting brochure and the reality of the work.
That is the tension we are going to explore for the next hour. The authors describe it as a Trojan horse strategy. There is this quote from one of the early leaders of the firm that really sticks with you.
Oh, I remember this one.
He advised his consultants to wedge yourself in and spread like an amoeba.
Spread like an amoeba. That is such a biological, almost parasitic image.
It's visceral. The idea is that once you are inside an organization, you don't just solve one problem, you spread out. You influence everything. You become part of the nervous system of the client.
But the critical question is, what kind of influence are they having? When that amoeba spreads, is it prioritizing safety, ethics, and long-term health?
Or is it prioritizing efficiency and shareholder value at any cost? And that's the rub.
So our mission for this deep dive is to look past the PowerPoint slides. We're going to ignore the buzzwords like right-sizing and transformation and operational excellence.
Mm-hmm.
We want to see what actually happens on the ground in factories, in hospitals, and in government agencies when McKinsey comes to town.
We have to peel back that layer of corporate polish because, as we will see, the consequences of scientific management can be incredibly physical and, in some cases, deadly.
Okay, let's unpack this. I want to start with a story that really hit me hard in the book.
Yeah.
It's about U.S. Steel. We are going to Gary, Indiana. This is the heart of the Rust Belt.
Gary is a fascinating place to start because it really represents the old economy. It was once the symbol of American industrial might. I mean, the whole city was built around the mill.
Right. The American dream, in a way.
In a way, yes. But by the time we get to the 2010s, it is struggling. U.S. Steel hasn't turned a profit in years, the stock is tanking, and the new CEO, Mario Longhi, decides he needs help. He needs to turn the ship around.
So naturally, he calls McKinsey.
He calls McKinsey, and McKinsey comes in with a plan. They always have a plan. This one was called the Carnegie Way.
It sounds very noble, doesn't it? Very patriotic, almost historic.
It does. It invokes the legacy of Andrew Carnegie, the founder. And the promise of the Carnegie Way was a relentless focus on economic profit. They wanted to cut costs and boost the bottom line. And to do that, McKinsey brought in their efficiency experts.
Now, we need to pause and visualize the environment here, because you said U.S. Steel is not a software company in Silicon Valley with beanbag chairs.
No. The book describes it vividly. White-hot lava, massive machinery, overhead cranes carrying tons of steel, high-voltage electricity everywhere. It is a place that wants to kill you if you aren't careful.
An inherently dangerous place to work.
Precisely. In fact, U.S. Steel had a ledger they called the Book of the Dead. It listed over 500 workers who had died inside that plant over the decades. So in an environment like that, you would assume that safety is the one budget line you never, ever touch.
It should be non-negotiable.
You can cut marketing, you can cut HR, but you don't cut maintenance in a steel mill. That's just common sense.
But McKinsey starts looking at the maintenance budget. And what did they find?
Well, they looked at the spreadsheets and saw inefficiencies. They saw money being spent on spare parts, on preventive maintenance, on, staffing levels. And they recommended a policy that the workers on the floor started calling "don't buy, get by."
Don't buy, get by. That sounds like something you do when you're a broke college student trying to keep a 1990 Honda Civic running.
That's a perfect analogy.
Not when you're running a massive industrial complex where lives are on the line.
That is exactly what it was. The idea was to slash the inventory of spare parts. If a machine breaks, don't just go to the stockroom and replace the part immediately. Try to jury-rig it.
Patch it up.
Try to fix it with what you have. Wrap it in duct tape if you have to. And to enforce this, they implemented something called the control tower.
The control tower. Okay, this is where it gets really dystopian for me. Explain how this worked in practice.
So imagine you're a veteran maintenance worker. You have been there 20 years. You know every bolt-on crane, #5. You know that a specific motor is vibrating in a way that means it is about to burn out.
You have that institutional knowledge. You can feel it.
Exactly. In the past, you just ordered the motor. Now, with the control tower, that request goes to a committee. And that committee includes McKinsey consultants.
Consultants who, presumably, have never fixed a crane in their lives.
Likely not. They are looking at data. They are looking at spend velocity. And they can say no. They can ask, do you really need this right now? Can we defer this spend to the next quarter so the numbers look better?
Oh, my God. So you have people with spreadsheets in a conference room overruling the people on the factory floor who are looking at the actual physical danger.
That is exactly what the workers alleged. And it went further. They laid off experienced maintenance workers. They took others and demoted them into what were called roving labor gangs.
Roving labor gangs. That sounds chaotic. It just sounds disorganized.
It destroys institutional knowledge. Instead of having a guy who knows the electrical system of a specific section perfectly, you have a generalist crew running around putting out fires.
Literally putting out fires, probably.
Probably.
Yeah.
You lose the nuance. You lose the ability to predict failure. You're always reacting instead of preventing.
And this isn't just about frustration or lost profits. This had a human cost. The book details 2 specific deaths that happened during this Carnegie Way period. I want to talk about Charles Kremke.
This is a tragic case. Charles Kremke was found unconscious with third-degree burns on his head. He had been electrocuted.
Just awful.
The investigation revealed that the proper safety protocols, specifically de-energizing the live connections, hadn't been followed. But the workers argued they couldn't follow them because of the staffing cuts and the pressure to keep things moving.
So the system made it impossible to be safe.
The state cited U.S. Steel for serious violations, including failing to provide protective gear. It was a clear-cut case of the environment being unsafe.
And then there was Jonathan Arizola. This story is just, it's heartbreaking because he saw it coming. He literally predicted his own death.
He did. Jonathan Arizola was 30 years old, a Navy veteran, father of 2, a tough guy. But he told his wife, Whitney, that he was worried. He said the job was becoming too dangerous because they were cutting back so many workers. He told her, there is always some kind of close call.
He knew. He was living it every day.
He was. In September 2016, he was troubleshooting a crane. He came into contact with a 480-volt electrical circuit. That is a massive amount of power.
Instantly fatal.
He was electrocuted and killed instantly.
And what was the fallout? I mean, Surely, after 2 deaths, there's a massive reckoning. The consultants get fired, the strategy changes.
Well, there was a reckoning from the workers. They marched on the main gate chanting, "McKinsey
They
sucks!"
call them out by name.
By name. They carried signs saying McKinsey stole and McKinsey contract violations. It is remarkably rare to see a labor union protest a consulting firm by name. Usually they protest management.
Right.
But in this case, the workers knew exactly who was pulling the strings. They saw the young consultants in the hard hats that didn't have a scratch on them.
But what about the company? What about the fines? That must have been huge.
The fines were pathetic. For the deaths of Kremke and Arizola, the initial fines were around $42,000. But U.S. Steel lawyers negotiated them down.
They negotiated.
They paid just $14,500.
$14,500. That is the price of 2 lives.
In the eyes of the regulatory system at that moment, yes. That is a rounding error. It's lunch money for a corporation that size.
Unbelievable.
But there was another lawsuit, a class action suit by investors. And this is key to understanding the McKinsey effect.
Why did the investors sue? I'd think they'd be happy about the cost cutting.
The investors claimed that the Carnegie Way was a sham. They argued that U.S. Steel was hiding its financial rot by deferring maintenance. So they were showing short-term profits by simply not spending money on necessary repairs.
Ah, I see. It's like if I stopped paying my mortgage or my car payment, I would suddenly have a lot of extra cash in my pocket. I would look rich.
Exactly.
But eventually the car gets repossessed and the house gets foreclosed.
Exactly. It is borrowing from the future to pay the shareholders today. It's unsustainable profit. And the workers paid the ultimate price for that illusion.
And McKinsey. Did they take any responsibility? Any hit at all?
As a standard, McKinsey walked away. They advised, the company implemented. That's the firewall.
The classic defense.
McKinsey takes no legal responsibility for the operational failures. They collected their fees, which were reportedly tied partly to the money U.S. Steel saved, and moved on to the next client.
Okay, so that's the Rust Belt. That's heavy industry. Let's pivot to a completely different environment, but one where we see the exact same philosophy at work. We're going to Disneyland, the happiest place on earth.
It is a jarring transition, isn't it, from a steel mill to a theme park? But the business logic is identical. In the late 90s, Disney executives were looking to cut costs at the parks.
I feel like that's always the starting point.
It's always the starting point. They brought in McKinsey to do a comprehensive evaluation of park operations. The resulting report was titled, Transforming Maintenance, Defining the Disney Standard.
Transforming maintenance again. I'm sensing a pattern here. What was the core idea this time?
The core concept McKinsey introduced here was something called Reliability-Centered Maintenance, or RCM. Now, I want to be clear here. RCM is a legitimate engineering concept.
It's not something they just made up?
No, it's borrowed from the aviation industry.
Okay, so if it works for airplanes, why shouldn't it work for Space Mountain? That seems logical on the surface.
Context matters. In aviation, you have massive redundancy. If one system fails, another takes over. You use data to predict when a part will fail and replace it just before it does, rather than checking it every single day unnecessarily.
That saves time and money.
It does. And it can increase safety if done right. But at Disneyland, the application of this science resulted in some baffling recommendations. The goal was to reduce the headcount of mechanics and move maintenance to the graveyard shift overnight so it wouldn't interfere with operations.
Maximize uptime. Get more people through the gates.
Exactly. They wanted to maximize uptime.
And there's this famous anecdote in the book about the lap bars that really illustrates the arrogance of the data-driven approach. Tell us about the lap bars.
This sums it up perfectly. A McKinsey consultant was shadowing a veteran mechanic. The mechanic was going row by row, checking the lap bars on a roller coaster. The consultant stopped him and asked why he was doing that.
Why he was checking the safety restraints. The most basic safety check imaginable.
Yes. The consultant pointed out that the data showed the lap bars basically never failed. They had an incredible safety record. So logically, according to the spreadsheet, checking them daily was a waste of time. It was inefficient.
And the mechanic's response.
The mechanic looked at him and said, "They don't fail because we check them every night."
Exactly. It's the survivor bias. The safety record exists because of the diligence you are trying to eliminate. It's such a perfect, beautiful encapsulation of the whole problem.
But the recommendations went through. They reduced the number of ride leads, the expert supervisors for each attraction. They replaced veteran mechanics with cheaper labor or relied more on data than eyes-on inspection.
And they adopted a philosophy that some insiders called run to failure.
Run to failure, which is a terrifying phrase for a ride carrying families.
It's the exact opposite of what you want.
Basically, keep the ride going until it actually breaks, rather than doing preventative maintenance that takes the ride offline.
And then we have the tragedy at Big Thunder Mountain Railroad.
September 2003. Big Thunder Mountain is a fast roller coaster designed to look like a runaway train. For days, riders and staff had been hearing strange noises coming from one of the trains, a loud clicking sound.
Clicking sound. That is never good on a roller coaster. That's the sound you dread hearing.
No, mechanics had actually put a yellow tag on the train indicating it should be taken out of service.
So they knew. The people on the ground knew there was a problem.
They knew. But the culture of keep it running, the pressure to maintain capacity and efficiency that McKinsey had helped instill, prevailed. The tag was ignored or overridden. The train went out with passengers.
And what happened?
The wheel assembly fell off. The train derailed. It crushed the lead car. A 22-year-old man named Marcelo Torres was killed. 10 others were injured.
Just devastating. And again, this tension between efficiency and safety. When you treat a theme park ride or a steel mill solely as a profit-generating asset on a spreadsheet, you lose sight of the fact that it is a physical machine carrying human beings.
And that is the crux of the critique in the book. McKinsey provides the scientific justification, the charts, the data, the RCM terminology that allows executives to make these cuts while telling themselves they're just being modern and efficient.
It gives them cover.
Cover is a great word for it. It's a shield. We didn't decide to cut safety. We followed the McKinsey recommendation on reliability-centered maintenance.
It launders the decision.
Precisely. It puts a stamp of intellectual approval on what is, at its core, a dangerous cost-cutting measure.
Okay, let's move to what is arguably the most damaging section of the book for McKinsey's reputation. We've talked about physical safety, industrial accidents.
Right.
Now we need to talk about public health. We need to talk about the opioid crisis.
This is the section that really ignited the recent firestorm around McKinsey. We are talking about their work with Purdue Pharma, the makers of OxyContin.
Now, set the context for us. When did McKinsey get involved with Purdue? Because Purdue was already known to be a bad actor, right? This wasn't a secret.
That is an important point. McKinsey didn't start with Purdue in the 90s. They really ramped up their work around 2004 and stayed until 2019. By 2007, Purdue had already pleaded guilty to federal criminal charges regarding the misbranding of OxyContin.
So they knew who they were getting into bed with.
Everyone knew this drug was addictive. Everyone knew there was a problem. Purdue's sales were actually waning because of the bad publicity and increased regulation.
So Purdue is in trouble. Sales are down. The regulators are circling. And they hire McKinsey to do what?
To turbocharge sales. That was the actual project name. Turbocharging Purdue's sales engine.
They actually call it that.
They did. Later, they rebranded it to Evolve to Excellence, which sounds much nicer.
Evolve to excellence. But the goal was to sell more opioids. Not to make them safer, not to change the business model, but just to sell more of them.
The goal was to sell more opioids, specifically targeting the highest volume prescribers. McKinsey used advanced data analytics to identify which doctors were writing the most prescriptions for opioids, and the recommendation was focus on them.
They weren't looking for doctors who were prescribing carefully. They were looking for the whales, essentially, the pill mills.
Exactly. They identified the high abuse risk prescribers and basically said, this is your target market. They told Purdue to increase the sales calls to these specific doctors.
So double down on the problem.
They also helped organize sales contests. There was one instance where they recommended a sales contest called the Pot of Gold.
Pot of gold. That is incredibly, unbelievably distasteful given the context.
The winners, the reps who sold the most pills during the height of the epidemic, won vacations to Aruba. One rep got a $36,000 bonus in a single quarter.
A $36,000 bonus.
McKinsey was helping to gamify the distribution of a highly addictive substance that was killing tens of thousands of people a year.
A vacation to Aruba for pushing addictive painkillers. It's just unbelievable. But there was one detail in the book that actually made my jaw drop. It was about the rebates. Can you walk us through the rebate proposal? This feels like the smoking gun.
This is chilling. In 2017, so this is late in the game, when the death toll is already catastrophic, McKinsey produced a slide deck for Purdue. They were looking at ways to deal with the insurance companies and pharmacies like CVS who are losing money on opioids.
Wait, why were the pharmacies losing money?
Because of the cost of treating overdoses and the liability. The product was costing the system too much money. So McKinsey proposed a rebate model.
A rebate?
The idea was that Purdue would pay a rebate to the pharmacies for every overdose event that could be attributed to their pills.
Pause. I want to make sure I understand this. They were going to pay the pharmacies for the overdoses.
Yeah.
Like a warranty. Sorry, our product nearly killed your customer. Here is some cash.
Yes. It was essentially a warranty on death. And they did the math. This is the part that is so disturbing. The slide deck actually estimates the number of overdoses.
They put a number on it.
They projected, for example, 2,484 overdoses at CVS for that year. And they assigned a dollar value to each event, $14,810.
They put a price tag on an overdose. $14,810.
It is the ultimate example of the amoral spreadsheet. To a consultant in a boardroom, an overdose is just a variable in an equation to balance the books. To the rest of us, it is a monstrous commodification of human suffering.
It's treating a life-or-death event like a defective product return.
Now, Purdue says they never implemented this specific rebate program. But the fact that it was proposed, written down, and presented by McKinsey partners shows a profound lack of ethical compass.
And while they were doing this, while they were turbocharging sales for Purdue, they were also working for the government, right, the regulator.
That is the other half of the scandal. At the exact same time they were advising Purdue on how to bypass regulations, McKinsey was under contract with the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration,
And what were they doing for the FDA?
advising them on drug safety and organizational structure.
You cannot make this up. They are advising the fox and the henhouse simultaneously.
Yes. And the book details how McKinsey personnel would literally work on FDA projects and Purdue projects concurrently. They claim there is a firewall, that they don't share confidential information.
But the conflict of interest is structural. How can you objectively advise the regulator on opioid safety when your other client is paying you millions to increase opioid sales? You can't.
You can't, and they knew. The book mentions that some senior partners talked about purging documents when they realized the legal heat was coming.
So a cover-up.
That's right. Martin Elling and Arnab Ghatak, two senior partners, were fired after email chains surfaced where they discussed deleting documents related to their Purdue work. One email literally said, "It probably makes sense to have a quick conversation about doing a little housekeeping."
Housekeeping. That is a euphemism for destroying evidence.
It certainly sounds like it. McKinsey eventually settled with all 50 states for over $600 million. They apologized. But again, no criminal charges for the firm.
They paid a fine.
They pay the fine, which, while large, is a fraction of their annual revenue, and they continue to operate.
It's a recurring theme. The client goes bankrupt, in this case Purdue. The executives might face heat, but the consultants write a check and move on.
It brings us to the next section, which touches on a different kind of moral dilemma. We are moving from public health to immigration enforcement. The book covers McKinsey's work with ICE immigration and customs enforcement during the Trump administration.
This was the source of a huge internal revolt at McKinsey, wasn't it? This is where their own people started to push back.
It was. For the first time, you had young consultants. Remember, these are the idealists we talked about in the intro, openly questioning leadership. There was a town hall meeting in D.C. in 2019 where things got very heated.
And what was the defense from leadership? How did they justify this work?
They tried to use the "we do execution, not policy" defense.
Okay, break that down. What does that mean?
Right. The McKinsey leadership stood up and said, essentially, look, we don't make the immigration laws. We don't decide who gets deported. We just help the agency execute its mission more efficiently. They tried to draw a line between the what and the how.
And the consultants weren't buying it. There's a quote from a young consultant at that meeting who stood up and said, "With that logic, you could justify working for any despot, even the Nazis."
It's a powerful counter-argument. If the policy is morally repugnant, can the execution ever be neutral? And when you look at what McKinsey actually recommended for ICE, it wasn't neutral, it was aggressive.
They were looking for cost savings again. That seems to be the common thread.
Always cost saving.
What did they suggest?
They identified ways to save money on detention. And the recommendations included cutting spending on food and medical care for detainees.
Cutting food and medical care for people in cages to save money.
And they did this analysis called the daily bed rate. They looked at where it was cheapest to house a detainee. They found that rural county jails were much cheaper, around $20 a day, compared to federal facilities or dedicated detention centers.
So they recommended moving detainees to these rural jails.
They did.
But why were those jails cheaper? It's not because they were just, more efficient.
No, it's because they had lower standards. Less supervision, worse food, worse health care, fewer legal resources. McKinsey was essentially advising ICE to prioritize the lowest cost provider regardless of the humanitarian conditions. They were optimizing for cost per human detained.
And the ghost aspect comes in here too.
Right.
The contract was structured in a way that McKinsey's name didn't even appear on the main documents, right? They were hiding.
Yes, it was a bureaucratic maneuver. They were a subcontractor to a subcontractor, effectively. It kept their fingerprints off the immediate paperwork, which is why it took investigative reporting to even uncover that they were there.
They wanted the revenue, but they knew the reputational risk, so they hid their involvement.
That appears to be the case.
So we've got domestic safety, public health, immigration. Now let's go global. Because McKinsey describes itself as a global firm. And when McKinsey comes to town, dedicates a lot of time to their work with authoritarian regimes.
This is where the values argument really crumbles. We can look at Saudi Arabia first.
A ministry of McKinsey.
That's the nickname for the Saudi Ministry of Planning. That's how embedded they are. They have been the architects of Mohammed bin Salman's, or MBS's, Vision 2030.
So they're building the future of the country. On paper.
They are essentially the brain trust for the kingdom's modernization efforts.
But it wasn't just economic planning. There was this report about Twitter that feels like something out of a spy novel.
This is a specific incident that caused a lot of fear. McKinsey produced a report for the Saudi government analyzing how their policies were being received on social media. In that report, they identified 3 specific critics who were driving negative sentiment on Twitter.
They named them.
They named them. They put their names on a slide.
And what happened to those 3 people?
After the report was issued, one was arrested, one had his phone hacked, and the third, who was anonymous, had 2 of his brothers imprisoned.
Now, McKinsey says they were just doing a sentiment analysis, right? That's the defense. They weren't saying, go arrest these guys.
That is their defense. They said they were horrified that the report might have been misused. But you have to ask, when you are handing a list of names of critics to a regime known for silencing dissent, what do you think is going to happen?
It's naive at best and complicit at worst.
You cannot act surprised when the secret police use the data you gave them.
And then there's the Ritz-Carlton purge. This plays out like a movie.
It does. MBS locked hundreds of wealthy Saudis, princes, and businessmen in the Ritz-Carlton Hotel in Riyadh. It was billed as an anti-corruption drive. But really, it was a shakedown.
He was consolidating power.
He forced them to sign over billions in assets to the state to buy their freedom. McKinsey had created the strategic plans for identifying corruption and recovering assets. They provided the roadmap that MBS used to consolidate his power and seize this wealth.
Let's move east. China. This is another area where McKinsey plays a double game. They advised the U.S. Pentagon, and they advised the Chinese state-owned enterprises.
It is a massive conflict of interest. The book highlights a retreat that McKinsey held. Corporate retreats are usually boring. This one was in
Xinjiang, which, for listeners who may not know, that's where the Uyghur internment camps are.
Exactly. This was in 2018. The world already knew about the camps. The UN had reported on them. And yet, McKinsey held their lavish retreat there.
So this wasn't an accident.
The book describes consultants riding camels and walking down red carpets in the desert. And just 4 miles away, literally 4 miles, there was a detention camp where thousands of people were being held against their will.
The symbolism of that is horrific, partying in the shadow of a genocide.
It shows a complete compartmentalization. We are here for business, politics is over there, but their business is politics in China.
Right.
They advised the company that built the artificial islands in the South China Sea, the ones China uses to project military power. They advised on the Belt and Road Initiative, which is China's primary tool for expanding global influence.
And at the same time, they are taking contracts with the U.S. Department of Defense.
Correct. Senator Marco Rubio and others have raised this. How can you advise the U.S. military on strategy while simultaneously strengthening the military-industrial base of America's primary strategic rival?
What's their answer to that?
McKinsey argues they have separate teams, separate servers, but the expertise, the know-how, flows through the firm. The best practices they learn in one place inevitably inform what they do in another.
We can't leave the international section without touching on South Africa. This was arguably their biggest financial scandal abroad.
The Eskom scandal. Eskom is the state power utility. McKinsey worked there alongside a company called Trillion. Trillion was linked to the Gupta brothers, who were at the center of state capture, basically looting the South African government through corrupt contracts.
And McKinsey's fees here were astronomical.
They were shocking. It was the biggest contract in the firm's history in Africa. They were taking a cut of the savings they generated, but the fees were so high that it looked like a payout.
And they were partnering with this Gupta-linked shell company.
Yes. When the scandal broke, it nearly destroyed McKinsey's South African office. They had to pay back the fees. They apologized. But the damage to the country blackouts, financial ruin at the utility, was done.
It seems like everywhere we look, U.S. Steel, Disney, opioids, ICE, Saudi, China, South Africa, there is this recurring theme. McKinsey comes in, proposes a rational plan based on data, extracts massive fees, and when the real-world consequences hit, when the boiler explodes, or the addiction rates spike, or the government collapses, McKinsey is already gone.
It is the accountability gap. And it brings us to the final section of the book, which looks at the broader economic impact of McKinsey. We often talk about CEO pay exploding in America, the gap between the worker and the CEO. The book traces this back to one man at McKinsey, Arch Patton.
The father of executive pay.
In the 1950s, executive pay was pretty flat. Patton had this idea to do a survey. He surveyed different companies to see what they paid their CEOs. The idea was to normalize pay, to make it scientific.
But it did the opposite.
Right, because once the survey was published, every CEO looked at it and said, wait, the guy at GM is making more than me. I need a raise. And the board said, well, we want to be in the top quartile, so we have to pay more.
It created an arms race.
It created a ratcheting effect. It turned executive compensation into a competitive sport, and it's never stopped.
And this feeds into the Enron story. We can't talk about McKinsey without mentioning Enron.
Jeff Skilling, the CEO of Enron, was a McKinsey partner for 21 years before he joined Enron. He was the ultimate McKinsey guy. And he brought that culture to Enron.
What culture was that?
The war for talent. The idea that if you hire the smartest people, the guys in the room, they can do no wrong. It fosters a certain kind of arrogance.
And the specific accounting trick, mark-to-market, that allowed Enron to fake their profits. That was something Skilling pushed.
Yes. Mark-to-market allows you to book the projected future profits of a deal the day you sign it.
Can you explain that with a simple example? Because it sounds complicated.
Sure. Imagine you open a lemonade stand. In normal accounting, if you sell a cup for $1, you book $1 of profit. With mark-to-market, you can say, I just signed a deal to sell lemonade to my neighbor for the next 10 years. I estimate I will make $10,000. And you book that $10,000 as profit today.
Even if the neighbor moves away next week or decides they don't like lemonade.
Exactly. Even if the neighbor never buys a single cup. It allowed Enron to claim massive profits on deals that eventually lost money. It's a recipe for fraud.
And it was celebrated as innovation until the whole house of cards collapsed.
It was.
And McKinsey supported this.
They celebrated Enron. They wrote case studies about how brilliant Enron was. Enron was the ultimate validation of the McKinsey worldview, that smart people with spreadsheets could bend reality.
So bringing this all together, we have covered a lot of ground. What is the so what here? Because McKinsey would argue, look, we help thousands of clients. We make companies more efficient. We help governments deliver services. You are cherry-picking the disasters.
And that is a fair point. They do thousands of engagements. Many are mundane and probably helpful. But the pattern the authors reveal is systemic. It's about what happens when you prioritize efficiency and shareholder value above all else, when you strip away the human context.
It's the danger of the outsourced conscience.
That's the phrase. When a CEO wants to do something unpopular, lay off 5,000 workers, cut safety checks, sell addictive pills, they hire McKinsey. McKinsey provides the slide deck that says the data supports this.
It makes it objective, or seem objective.
It allows the CEO to say, I'm just following the expert advice. It diffuses responsibility.
And McKinsey says, we just give advice. We don't pull the trigger.
But the advice is the bullet. That's the argument of the book. You cannot separate the advice from the consequence. If you hand someone a loaded gun and tell them where to aim, you are part of the shooting.
There's also this generational tension inside the firm now. The book ends on a note about the internal struggle.
Yes. The younger consultants, the ones who joined to fight climate change and solve poverty, they are reading these headlines. They are the ones protesting the ICE work. They are the ones asking, why are we working for coal companies?
So there's a battle for the soul of the firm.
There is. Can they maintain this values-driven image while pursuing profit at any cost? It's a fundamental contradiction.
It will be interesting to see if the firm changes or if they just get better at hiding what they do.
Their business model depends on secrecy. Client confidence, they call it. As long as they operate in the dark, it is very hard to hold them accountable. This book shines a spotlight, but it's just one beam in a very large, dark room.
Well, that is a sobering thought to end on. Next time you see a confusing government policy or hear about a massive corporate layoff or wonder why a drug price just skyrocketed, Take a look for the invisible hand. Ask yourself, is McKinsey in the room?
And ask yourself this. If we trust the data without questioning the moral framework behind it, where does that lead us? What happens when we outsource our conscience to a spreadsheet?
Thank you for listening to The Deep Dive. This was a heavy one, but an important one. We'll see you next time.